Another pleasant afternoon for some, but not for others. Look, today I want to look at the 5 ages of humanity. The most dangerous period in any society is when people's income stream is threatened. Now, the 5 ages of humanity can be defined as hunter-gatherers, agriculture, the Industrial Revolution, the Digital Revolution, and now we have the Artificial Intelligence Revolution. Each of those periods had a profound impact on how people lived and survived. We are now moving into a particularly dangerous period of history. And I'm not talking about the stupidity of bombing Iran and destroying Lebanon and causing genocide in Gaza and the West Bank. I'm talking about something which will have an impact on each and every one of us, and an impact on the type of society we live in, and an impact on how we live. Irrespective of whether you live in sub-Saharan Africa or the world's biggest city, Jakarta, which has 42 million people. The fact is that as we move from the digital age to the artificial intelligence age, there are going to be huge impacts on the way societies function and the need for human labour. And that is the key. We live in a society where income is derived from investment or labour. Income is necessary to provide shelter, food, security. So during the Industrial Revolution, we saw an increasing need for labour, especially skilled labour. And in many countries around the world, we saw almost full employment, with unemployment rates of around 5%. Obviously, during the Depression, those unemployment rates increase. The digital age has had little impact on the way people earn an income. It has a huge impact on moulding people's opinion, especially when we see the digital platforms are owned by a minority, a minuscule minority, whose major aim is to increase profitability by getting you to look at their sites so that they can charge more and more for advertising. So the digital age may have had some impacts politically, but not economically. Now comes artificial intelligence, a byproduct of the digital age. The fact is, we no longer need everybody in society to be involved in work for that society to function. Already in Australian society, over 1/3 of the population is not involved in paid work and relies on social security benefits to survive, and that's the key, survive. So are there any historical precedents to us moving into the digital age? Well, slavery is an important precedent. When the city of Rome began to expand and began to conquer the surrounding areas, not only did they have booty, but they had more and more and more slaves. While Rome was a republic, power was shared between the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians were the ruling classes, the plebeians did the work. They both needed each other. Without the plebeians, there was nobody to do the work. Without the plebeians, you couldn't derive a profit. But as slavery became widespread, what we saw is the role of the plebeian was diminished, and hunger and access to shelter became an issue. An important general who had just conquered parts of northern Spain for the Roman Empire, who was coming back to the Rome, noticed that the soldiers marched back to Rome, that they passed city, town, village after village, where most of the work was done by slaves. The plebeians had been marginalised to the outskirts of the towns, and the patricians had become rich on the labour of slaves. But the dilemma was, for the Roman Republic, the plebeians had political power. They had some political power. And you cannot have millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people who are unemployed in any society who have political power. So the Romans overcame this problem by introducing policies based on bread and circuses. Subsidised food, subsidised accommodation, entertainment. At one stage in the Roman Empire in the 1st century AD, Roman citizens had over 260 paid public holidays in a year. That's every 2 out of 3 days were holidays where they're entertained in a variety of manner. The policy of bread and circuses resolved the problem of an excess population that had political power. Let's move the clock to 2026. As artificial intelligence is beginning to bite into the job market. So although unemployment rates have not dramatically risen, we are seeing more and more industries, especially the software industry, service industry, accountants, legal, and to a lesser extent medical work, start to be monopolised by artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, the networks are owned by the same people who own the digital platforms. Now this poses a huge problems for government. Whether they're authoritarian governments, as in Russia or China, or whether they are social democracies, parliamentary democracies, as in Western Europe and Australia, or even a dictatorship. Because if you have a large section of the population that can no longer meet its financial responsibilities, especially access to basic necessities, who've got some political power, and even if they don't have political power, you create disenchantment, disillusionment, and resistance. It's no accident that Australia was founded on the backs of convicts, and over 10% of the convicts that were sent here had were political prisoners. Now you've all heard about the Luddites, the followers of Ned Ludd. When the Industrial Revolution occurred in England and the commons were closed and people were forced into the factories, what we saw is skilled artisans and labourers losing their ability to earn income on the land. And this led to a revolt by people who had been displaced, who were followers of the mythical leader Ned Ludd. Now they were not mindless machine breakers as we were told. They were people who were trying to protect their income from the introduction of shoddy goods. Almost 500 Luddites were banished to Australia as convicts, serving sentences from 7 years to a lifetime imprisonment. So, coming back to 2026, we find ourselves in the same situation. Unemployment benefits in this country are the lowest social security benefit. No one can prosper on unemployment benefits. Social security benefits for the aged, the sick, the chronically ill, single parents are a minuscule return to maintain peace in the community, because people talk about the dole and welfare. It's not dole and welfare. When you look at the legislation, it's a social security legislation. It's about society looking after the needs of those who, through no fault of their own, in the majority of cases, can no longer be part of the paid workforce, to ensure their basic needs are met, and at the same time decrease any political resistance, revolts and rebellions in the community. But as unemployment rates of unemployment will increase with the introduction of artificial intelligence, and has a significant number of Australians, especially young Australians, have debts up to their neck, whether it's an education debt, whether it's a mortgage, whether it's rent. The fact is, the loss of 4 or 5 weeks of paid employment can make a dramatic change to people's lives, and it does. So as unemployment increases with the introduction of artificial intelligence, and we live in a capitalist society obviously, so we have the classical bread and circuses dilemma. As we have more people than we need for society to function and to be profitable, what we do with the excess? Well, you can eliminate them physically, which will create a lot of issues, although some people believe in that type of theory. But the fact is, society has to make some type of accommodation via which it provides cultural avenues, social avenues and economic avenues where everybody in society can play a useful part. Not everybody needs to be involved in the paid workforce in order to live comfortably. The problem is, the profits today, the majority of profits, go into the hands of the investment class. 50 years ago, for every dollar that was invested and a profit was made, 2/3 would go to the workers making the profit and 1/3 to the investor. Today, the equation has been turned on its head. 1/3 goes to the workers who make the profit and 2/3 goes to the investor. So we find ourselves in a situation where a different type of social security agreement needs to be implemented. And I'm talking, as you're aware, of a universal basic income. The idea of a universal basic income is nothing new. People have toyed with the idea for thousands of years. In hunter-gatherer society, which were not based on a monetary system, you had a universal basic income which was based on mutual aid and sharing, because that was required for that particular group to survive in a hunter-gatherer society. Now, universal basic income is possible. Not only needed, but possible to implement. Easily possible to implement. It's based on ensuring that profits that are made through the introduction of artificial intelligence don't just go into the pockets of investors. It's possible because it decreases the amount of people involved in policing and creating a social security beneficiary system. A universal basic income is a very simple concept. Everybody gets a wage, an equal wage. Everybody. It's a living wage. That wage could be determined by a parliamentary committee, could be determined by the courts. What is a living wage? That's what the Arbitration Commission does now anyway. Everybody, irrespective of their income, would receive that living wage. Now, many people, free of the need to work long hours to satisfy basic human needs, will be happy to live on a universal basic income. Their lives can be expanded through cultural assets, through self-improvement, through sport, and the list goes on and on. Some people will want to continue to work. And they will continue to work because the decreased number of people that will be in the workforce would be enough to cover the increased unemployment through the introduction of artificial intelligence. Now, when taxation time comes around, what occurs is that the more you earn, the more of that universal basic income returns to the state through taxation. For example, let's say if you earn 100,000, you keep 3/4 of the universal basic income. You earn 150,000, you keep half. You earn 200,000, you keep a third, and the list goes on and on. And if you earn 500,000, you lose the universal basic income. It comes back into the taxation system and is used as revenue to provide that universal basic income. We need to stop thinking of unemployment as the end of our lives. Unemployment in a private investment for private profit world is the road to disaster. As they used to say, 1 penny more of expenditure than what you earn and you find yourself eventually in an exceptionally difficult situation economically. The fact is, it's time that we talked about a universal basic income and that we placed pressure on political parties to adopt the universal basic income as their primary income source. So, if you are interested in a universal basic income, I suggest you join public interest before corporate interests. One of our key policy planks is the introduction of a universal basic income. Now, public interest before corporate interest was formed in 2015. While Divided Nation, a political party that divides Australians, continues to gain traction, while the Liberal National Party keeps shooting themselves in the foot, while the Australian Labor Party, that has a record majority, refuses to introduce any reforms because it's so frightened of the social media and the Murdoch media, it's time that you look at a different political party. And I'm not talking about the Australian Greens. I'm talking about public interest before corporate interest. Currently we're not registered, but we aim to be registered sometime in the near future. So if you are interested in having a universal basic income in this country, then join. Joining is easy. Just go, you can do it online, go to PIBCI, PIBCI.net. If you want to talk to a human being, you can always ring me and leave a message on 0439 395 489, 0439 395 489. Without us becoming actively involved in a campaign to introduce the universal basic income, the reality is that we will enter a period of upheaval, dislocation and poverty.